Hey, everybody, this is Jeff, your host here. Having some really unfortunate technical problems with my special guest. But this is Let's Talk About It. I'm glad you're joining me for those of you who are. Let's see if I've got anybody in the chat room here. It doesn't look like we have anybody online tuning in. Uh, my focus has gotten shifted because my guest is having problems coming on board here. So I'm a little discombobulated right now. And this was an important show for me, as a matter of fact. So I'm hoping she can figure it out. And it is a female, somebody very close to me. But anyway, I wanted to do a show today about to be or not to be. But before I explain that, I want to tell you guys a little bit about why I do this show. And I'm going to kind of give you the genesis of how I ended up in this whole situation over the last 48 years. My story started when I came to the Pacific Northwest. Prior to that, I went to a school called Georgia Junior Republic. And this is where my whole world changed when I went to this. Man, everything's not working right, girl. Okay, so Georgia Junior Republic it's kind of like well, at the time, it was an institutional school for troubled kids. And it was co-ed. It's in Freeville, New York, which is just outside of Ithaca, New York, approximately 80 miles from where I grew up. And I was sent there because I was an incorrigible kid, but I didn't want to go back home after spending some time in the juvenile delinquent facility in Rochester, New York. And I wrote about this in my book. But when I got done with the 30-day sentence I got for being pretty bad kid, I didn't want to go back home. You know, we were poor. Life was difficult. It had been a struggle. So I told the judge that I really didn't want to leave the juvenile detention facility. It's a true story. And my probation officer, they did a test. They tested my IQ. And they said he's too smart to lock him up. So they ended up sending me to Georgia Junior Republic. I did a whole show with some of the kids that I went to school with at Georgia Junior Republic. Georgia Junior Republic was, like I said, 80 miles from home. And it was like this campus in the mountains of Ithaca, New York, or in the outskirts. Real beautiful. It was like a great big farm with a bunch of cabins and cottages dotted all over the place. And that's where the kids lived. Anyway, I was there until the end of October 1976. Radically changed my life. It changed how I saw the world. These were predominantly troubled kids. A lot of the kids were wealthy, not all. And a lot of us were there ordered by the courts. And I met white kids, Puerto Rican kids, you name it. We were all there. And the one thing that I learned about being at Georgia Junior Republic is that we all had problems, but we're just trying to grow up, and we were growing up, almost all of us, every one of us, I would imagine, in really broken homes. I didn't have a dad growing up. My mom raised 7 kids by herself, God rest her soul. So it was a very difficult time for a lot of kids. There was a lot of abuse, both physical and sexual abuse that kids had experienced. Some of the stories that we all shared. There was a couple hundred kids here. They were heart-wrenching to listen to what some of these other kids were going through. And I realized at a very young age, I think I was 13 when I arrived, that I wasn't the only one who was struggling with just doing life and poverty and, all that stuff. Anyway, I ended up leaving Georgia Junior Republic. I went back to Rochester, New York for a very short period of time. I left Georgia Junior Republic, I think, in October of 1976. I was in Portland, Oregon in February of 1977. And as a 17-year-old kid now, I'm in Portland, Oregon, all by myself. Well, my brother was here, and he was married. He and his wife were going through a divorce, but they weren't when I got here. But almost immediately after I got here, they did. So he ended up going into the Navy, and I eventually followed him within that year. So I joined the military in 1977, the end of 1977, because my brother was gone. and there was no reason for me to be here. My father was here at the time. I didn't really hold much regard for him, but that's why my brother was in Portland, Oregon, because he came out here to live with our dad, who, to be honest, was not. It just wasn't worth it. He was not a father to us. Anyway, there's a reason why I'm bringing all of this forward. So I end up doing the military, and then I come back, United States Navy. I came back. I didn't go back to Rochester, New York when I got out of the military. I came back to the Pacific Northwest. Now I'm here predominantly all by myself. I ended up getting married. It was, marriage was a really difficult time, very hard time in my life. And as a result of how that all ended, I was a mess. I was a mess, and I started doing drugs. I never really did drugs. I smoked pot and all that stuff when I was a kid, but I never really did drugs. And then I fell into this whole cycle of drugs, and it was, a really bad time in my life. I didn't realize how bad it was affecting me. Anyway, I ultimately met Michelle, who is my wife. And, after Georgian Republic, I come out here and I meet Michelle. This is probably 1986, somewhere in there. Her life was developing. Anyway, we ended up getting married in 91. 91? She's going to kill me if I get this wrong. 91. So we got married, and I something happened during our marriage. I was kind of tired of a lot of the stuff. I went through a lot of legal stuff. But the bottom line was I ended up learning about the feast of the Lord. Somehow I met this pastor named Pastor Mark Biltz, and my entire world transformed. I had an experience in 2007 that is literally how I'm doing what I'm doing and even alive. I remember a lady came up to me in a Christian church years ago. She prophesied over me. She said, there's going to be 3 attempts to take your life. Well, I kind of joked it off. I probably was high. Who knows? I can't remember. Anyway, I had a car accident before the Feast of the Lord thing here. I had a car accident, and then I had an aneurysm shortly thereafter. I think that was in 98, but I started the plumbing company, and everything was going great until that happened. Anyway, the car accident, subsequently, I ended up, well, this is another story. Let me go back. I had an experience in 2007. Okay. The car accident happened earlier, and we were looking for pictures of the brain surgery and all the stuff that I went through, but we don't have any. We don't have any of those pictures. That happened in 1998. I just started the company, and now I'm having a brain aneurysm, and I had a car accident. It was my fault. It was a bad situation, bad time in my marriage. I won't go into all the details of that, but I was driving down the road, and I was so mad. I mean, I don't think I've ever been any madder. I completely blanked out the fact that I'm in a car driving down the road. And next thing I know, I looked over to my right. I kind of realized I was driving the car just as I kind of came back into my mindset. And there was a red light. I was just now passing under the red light. And this whole side of the car lit up, and I went like that, and there was a headlight right there. That's all I remember. I don't remember the impact. Also, I remember somebody said the car, I somehow engaged the accelerator and went around the corner and almost got decapitated. And this is stories that people told me later on from witnesses who saw the accident. A lady got in the car and she did CPR. I don't know. They said she was a nurse. The nurse couldn't leave, but this person, whoever she was, helped me in the car. And then to this day, I don't know who that was. Anyway, I woke up in an ambulance and they said, you're on your way up to the hospital. I thought I was dreaming. I couldn't remember getting home to go to bed, to be having this dream. And all of a sudden, he stuck me with a needle, and I knew I wasn't dreaming anymore. And the next thing I know, I woke up in a hospital they were putting ice on my chest. That's kind of the genesis of that. Anyway, I survived that car accident. And then a few months later, I had a complete aneurysm. They opened up my head. They typically puncture a couple of holes in there, but they had to open up my skull and drain me out. And I was looking for the medical records. They said, you're a miracle, because all of this blood that had built up in your drum was infected now, because it's been in there for a couple of weeks. And they told me most people who have this kind of bleed die within 3 minutes. You're not supposed to be alive. So the car accident, the aneurysm, okay? I forgot about that lady who told me that there was going to be 3 attempts to take my life. I totally forgot about her. Anyway, I recovered from the aneurysm. My marriage was in tatters, and I can't remember, but in 2007, this was in 1998, 2007, everything got worse in the marriage. Anyway, we ended up getting divorced. Michelle divorced me shortly after 2007. I'm Medina. Hey, Alan, I see you guys are in here. So now you got to understand something. Why Michelle divorced me? I was doing cocaine. Woohoo! I was smoking up Peru and was looking for Colombia. It was a mess. And I remember going to a psychiatrist. And she said, write down on a piece of paper the things you like about you and the things you don't like. I'll never forget this lady. So I came back the next week, and I had a whole page of stuff I didn't like. And I had 3 things on the other side. And she said, the reason why you're medicating yourself with cocaine is because you don't want to live this person. And you don't know who this person is. But that's who you really are. And that was kind of an eye-opener for me. That was kind of like, wow, I'm drug addicted because I don't want to face all these things, these failures that I wasn't doing well with. So anyway, I survived all of that. And then there was a time in my life where after that aneurysm, I remember walking out into the living room. Michelle was living with her mother with our kids. It was bad. And I got on my hands and knees. This is honest to God, true story. God is my witness. I got on my hands and knees. You got to understand, folks, I was doing roughly $1,000 a day of crack cocaine. I remember my heart beating so fast that I thought I could take it out and sit on the table and have a conversation with it. It was a mess. But I got on my hands and my knees, and I said, if you are who you say you are, God Almighty, take this from me. Get this out of me. I get a little emotional here because I felt helpless. I couldn't beat this thing. Anyway, I see my special guest is going to be, I'll be bringing her on in a minute. Anyway, I couldn't beat this addiction. And so I prayed, God, you got to take this from me. I can't do this. God is my witness. The very next day, I wasn't drinking. Well, I never really was a drinker, but the crack cocaine was gone. The desire for it was gone and has never returned. That's when I started paying attention. Now I got to go backtrack. And I'm going to bring my special guest in, and she's going to kind of tell you a few things from her perspective. My special guest is actually one of my sisters, and we're going to bring her on right now. Let me go ahead and get this off. Hey, sis. Are you good?
I think I'm good.
So for those listening, this is my sister Desi. She's 3 years younger than me, and I was kind of talking about George Junior Public, so I'm going to go ahead and backtrack. Hey, Elizabeth, I see you in here. Um, all the trouble I was when I was a kid. You can tell that story, right?
Not a lot of it, but I
I
love
was
to know from what I learned. But for the most part, I was much younger than you, so you know what? You were there, you weren't there, you were there, you weren't there, and life went on. So the memories I have are vague.
right. That's because we're getting old, sis. We can't remember anything. But anyway, so when I went away to George Junior Republic, because I got the 30 days, I'm going to backtrack for a minute, sis. Now that you're in, I'm glad you got it figured out. Uh, I went to 30 days, and then I came home, and I didn't want to be home. So I ended up going to George Junior Republic, and I was there from the age of 13 to the age of 16. Then I came back to Rochester, New York after that, and it was like, I got to get out of here. So then my sister is saying, you're moving a lot, sis. But I left, and I went to Oregon, and that was kind of the breakaway moment for me. So do you remember when I left?
I don't quite remember exactly when you left. I just know you were there and then you weren't. And you haven't been back. So it's
well, we're going to talk about the minute I did come back.
Yes.
But sis, do you remember well, let's go ahead and catch her. I'm going to catch you up now, folks. There's a reason I'm doing this show, and my sister's kind of bringing up the rear about what she remembers. Do you remember when you guys got the news that I had been in a car accident?
Yes.
And I was having now an aneurysm.
Yes.
And I was having brain surgery.
Yes.
Okay. So
I remember.
I woke up. Go ahead.
Yeah. I remember Mom.
Wait. You're blanking out.
I'm sorry. Am I there?
Try again. Yes.
I remember Mom doing whatever it took to get out there. I know she packed up and left home in a hurry to get out there because you were getting ready to have some serious surgery.
They told my mother and my wife that I was probably going to be neurologically impaired, and that when my mom came out here, it was because they were thinking that I was going to have to be put into an institution because of how significant the surgery was going to be. They were also saying I might not make it through the surgery. Anyway, I made it through the surgery. I woke up in the hospital bed, and a few minutes after I woke up, I'll never forget it, my mother walked in the room, and I was like, what are you doing here? But that was like my mom. She was truly a mama's bear. Anyway, I woke up to my mother, who had flown all the way across the country, and I woke up to her she came into the room. I could get a little emotional here. Anyway, my mother, who I led to the Lord years earlier, telling her about Jesus, she now she's out here and she's like gung ho for Jesus. Anyway, I came back to my apartment. My mother had cleaned the whole thing up. The apartment looked like a different place. It was spotless. And I remember some of the things that I had struggled with my mother. I remember that day. They all just kind of ebbed out of my spirit because for the first time, and then I was going to get emotional. For the first time, really, in my life, I saw the kind of love that my mom had for us. and all the other stuff didn't matter anymore. And our relationship, it had a few bumps and curves after that. But for the most part, I saw her as a completely different person. And my mom became my friend, not just my mother, for the first time really in my life. Hey, sis, my other sister's in the room as well. So anyway, mom hops on a plane and she leaves. I have this moment with the Lord. I'm completely drug free. And then I figure out, what am I going to do? I got to get this plumbing company going. So I started doing that. And then I had an experience in 2007 where everything changed. So sis, this is where you kind of jump in. 2007, the Lord told me I had to learn something. It was an audible voice while I was in church. Then I started sending all this stuff home. Sis, I'll let you jump in here.
Well, because the piece that I want to bring in, discussed earlier, is when you moved back home to Rochester with your wife and children, and you were going through your stuff at that time,
Right.
and we were, I can't remember if we were out walking, but somehow we were together, and we were walking because you said, you believe the Lord told you that one day you were going to be teaching his word. And when I brought that back to your memory, you couldn't quite remember that conversation. But fast forward to 2007, when you got this major download and shift, and then you started sending us 20, 30 emails a day.
I remember that.
But the change that took place in you, the understanding, it was so intense, and you had so much passion, and you were driving us nuts. But somewhere along the line, I started reading. I started actually reading. I'm like, okay, if this is worth him putting effort, let me start reading. So bits and pieces started making sense to me. So I began my own personal journey to figure out what you were beginning to understand. And I remember at some point, I think it was almost a couple of years later. I don't believe it was immediate, because
It wasn't.
I was in my car. I remember this piece clearly. I was in my car and I was having a conversation with the Father, and I said, there's too much stuff. This is too much. And if you don't make it make sense to me, I'm going to die. Now, I didn't mean death. I just meant it was so overwhelming, but I couldn't quite put the pieces together. And you called me that same day and said, I was going to say something to mom, but I feel directed to send it to you. And so I said, okay. And when I got it, it was the Feast of the Lord, that which you're showing on the screen. And once I read and listened to the video and went through all of that material, all that stuff began to connect. The pieces began to make sense, that the biblical story was much more than a church service was offering. And that the God intended us to see a kingdom. He intended us to see a government. He intended us to see a structure that was beyond religious stories and tradition. It's a much bigger story. And it was that teaching from Mark Biltz, I think there was something in there from, what's her name? I cannot think of her name, but she also had a Feast of the Lord.
I know what you're talking about. You're talking about Valerie Moody.
Yes.
Because I sent you that book.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. All right. So anyway, now you see this transformed brother who had been gone for all these years, and I'm like this zealot going out of my mind trying to figure out. Not only was I trying to share this with you and mom, and our mother had had 4 strokes by now. I can't remember when she had them, but I remember her telling me, "I want to learn what you're teaching," but she couldn't retain it. She was sad about that. But anyway, her whole family basically. I mean, we had a dog named Satan. Do you remember Mom standing on the porch calling for the dog?
Yes.
Here, Satan, Satan. Oh, I can't. Those black Christian folks that we grew up with, they must have thought we were crazy. Anyway, sis, now you saw me go through this transformation, and then I wrote my book, which was let me just bring it up here. I wrote the book Uncoloring Race while I was divorced. For the 2 years that I was divorced, I just had this compelling. Somebody told me you need to write your testimony, so I wrote this book. Sold quite a few of them. This is now 14 years ago. Anyway, I'm the company sold. We don't really have anything more. The divorce kind of destroyed the whole family for the most part. And then I get hit with cancer. You don't know much about that, right? What do you know? What was your perspective?
I believe if I recall correctly, I think it was uh, mom again uh, came in and let us know that you had this throat cancer, and it was pretty bad. And then I remember the on the other side of the throat cancer, I remember your your voice changed dramatically. Like what people are hearing now is not the voice you had. Um,
Right.
uh, so I just remember that was also a scary time. Like, oh my gosh, my brother's got stage 4, and typically that's a death sentence, we think, and yet here you are talking and living and thriving. So that's pretty much my memory of it. Is we were all sitting on pins wondering, were you going to come through this?
Okay, so folks, this was a difficult time because not only did I have throat cancer, my company was gone, my family was gone, my wife was gone, and here I am running around telling everybody Jesus is Jew. And I'm just sending emails all over the place. I'm speaking, I'm doing all this stuff. And then I get hit with this cancer. And it was at that moment I remember that lady who said there was going to be 3 attempts to take your life. They weren't going to be successful. I remember that during the cancer.
Wow.
Go ahead, sis.
No, I just said
Uh,
wow because I
yeah,
that's
we were going to New Song Church in Portland, Oregon, and a lady came over and told me those 3 things were going to happen, but that they weren't going to be successful. And I remembered it during when I was coming out of the cancer. I remember the doctor saying to me, I had a team of doctors. There was like 2 interns and 2 other doctors on this cancer thing. The surgery was done at Madigan Military Hospital. I'm a vet. Um, but as I was leaving, the doctor said, I really admire your attitude about all this. He said, but I just want you to know that these people sitting in front of you, we're going to do what we can to save your life. And I walked out of the room going, okay, Lord, you dumped all this Torah stuff into my head. What are we going to do about this? I'll never forget when they wheeled me in. And I had my kids there. They're growing up now. This is 2011. They wheeled me in. And I remember saying, okay, Lord, do whatever you got to do. Now, there was an experience that I had while I was on that table. In that space and time while I was anesthetized, there was a guy pulling a rope, in this vision dream thing I was having while I was under. And it was connected to a tarp, a big blue tarp. And there was this great big pile of crap, like garbage, like a garbage dump that he was pulling. And there were roaches and rats and all kinds of maggots and things festering in that pile of crap. And this guy walked up in this vision dream and he says, "Can I help you get rid of this stuff?" Anyway, he jumps into the pile and he starts cleaning up stuff, throwing stuff out, until pretty soon there was a little tiny pile. But he was asking this guy, "What do you want to do with this?" And the guy would say, "Well, I don't want that." And so he would ball it up and kind of throw it out of sight. And he did this over and over and over again until pretty soon there was just a little pile on this tarp. And he walked up to that person carrying it. And it was at that moment, that person was me. And the person who had jumped in to clean up my mess was the God that I believe in. And he looked at me and he says, "What do you want to do with that stuff?" And I said, "I don't know." And he says, "Well, how about you just give me the rope?" And when I released the rope and gave it to him, I don't remember what happened after that, but I was no longer dragging all of the things that Jeff didn't like about himself through my life. They were all gone. So I was able to come out of that surgery with a whole different perspective based on what God dumped into my head. Now, I don't want this to sound like a religious thing. I'm telling you what happened to my life. Then my world took off. I started speaking, doing television stuff, traveling around, and broke. No money. Desi, do you remember when when Michelle and I ended up, I was broke. I was sitting in a rental property. I had 37 cents to my name. And the landlord who owned the house, I would do side work for him, but we were 9 months in the rears on paying the rent. Anyway, my sister called me, or she said, I wish to this day I had that letter you wrote. I don't know what happened to it. But she wrote me a letter that left me sitting at the table looking at a quarter, 2 pennies, and a dime. My family's gone. My wife has got an apartment. My kids are gone. I got one dog dying of cancer, and another one, little guy. And she sends me this letter, and it was the most beautiful letter. And then she kicked in $1,000 while she was trying to buy a house. So I called my mother. I said, Mom, she can't afford to give me $1,000. She's buying a house. And my mother said, shut up. I sent you $1,000 too. I'll never forget that. So now I had $2,037. And I was able to pack up the house. The landlord, we cleaned the house up. My son and I, we made it spotless to where he didn't have to do anything. And he came by and he's to get the keys, and I'm loaded up. I'm moving up to Tacoma now. And he said, nobody has ever left my property like this. He says, all that money you owe me in the rears, we're done. You don't have to worry about it. And it was thousands of dollars. Anyway, so I got $2,000 for my family, and I got let off the hook $1,000 in rent. And I moved to Tacoma because I wanted to understand better what was in my head. And the person who put those Feast DVDs lived up here. And that's how I ended up here. Okay. And so now, sis, give me your perspective on your brother. Having gone through all that stuff, you came out to visit me. Share your perspective.
Well, I did come out to visit, and the most wonderful.
Hey, Dina. I'm sorry, Dina Dye's in here too. So that's my trainer. Wait, sis, we can't hear you. Start again.
The trip out to Washington, favorite part was going deep sea fishing on the charter boat, but never thought I'd do that. But let's back up to that statement, the conversation we had when the Lord, when you said, I'm going to be teaching the word of God to people. And that's when you lived in Rochester, New York with your family. And years later, through all that you've been through the aneurysm, through the car accident, through the cancer, through the major surgery, through all of it, you're living that. You're actually living that conversation. What is different is that you're living it from the perspective and teaching it to anyone who will open their ears to listen. You know, God is way bigger than what we've turned him into, and what he intended, the story of who he is and what he intended is so much more. And I remember one of the things about my transition is I would go to service, and you know, the beauty of going to service and the history of walking out relationship with the Lord, you know, you know him. You get to a place where you know him and you're comfortable with that. And then it started stirring in me. There's got to be more than this. But I didn't understand that. And that's how my journey started. I started paying attention to what you were sending and trying to figure out what was the stirring going on in me. There's way more to God than this. And I remember being in a Sunday service and actually getting up and walking out because um, it just wasn't enough anymore. It just literally wasn't enough. And that's, you know, crying out to God, show me this, show me that. So I look at you now and I see that conversation in its fruition and thriving. And I see a man who doesn't give up, who, you know, the father said, go back and marry your wife. You went back to marry your wife. The instruction he gives you, the teaching, the knowledge he gives you, you freely give out. And you're, for me, you're, you know, oh, I got to go back because you were the one that brought mom. You were the one that brought Jesus into the family, truly. Like mom had gone to church a couple times. We heard her stories. Uh, and, but the father used you to bring Messiah into the family. And then he turned around and years later has used you to bring biblical understanding through Torah, through kingdom, through government, through what he intended us, the lens he intended us to see it through. So it's not just tradition and it's not just stories. It's how do you put this without and take out the common, I want to say churchy kind of terms, but it truly is a kingdom and it's not of this world. And until you allow yourself to say, Father, show me what I don't see, despite how passionate you are in your relationship with the Lord, how much you love Jesus, how much emotion you have in it, there's so much more to the Father. And he brings that all with you. You don't lose that. It becomes richer and deeper because you begin to see us, the part of the Father that we've been disconnected from. And so, my brother, Jeff, you have passionately brought that forth all these years. You have not sidestepped that mission that you spoke out your mouth, which can only have been from Hashem, because you're a living testimony of those very words. I'm going to share the gospel, and the gospel is much bigger. If you would give your chance to see the Father for who he really is, it'll blow your mind.
I've got to thank you, sis. I appreciate that because that literally is what happened. I came up here because I wanted to learn. I didn't know what was in my head now, and I wanted to learn. And I wanted to meet people who knew this. And I got involved in the Hebrew roots and all this old stuff. And now I throw all that stuff to the side because, like my sister said, it's about a kingdom. It's about relationship and it's about serving others. I mean, that's the backbone of the kingdom of God. And I started meeting people that could teach me this. Then I started reading academic books, Rico Cortez, and my friend, my mentor, the person who I did a show with, a podcast for 2.5 years, Dr. Dina Dye. She's a biblical historian. She's Jewish. She began to show me what God dumped into my head. She was quintessential, the part about all of this that made the most sense. And so I've been in that relationship with her for as long. But I wanted to say all of this, not necessarily because I'm having a biblical conversation. I want people to know why I'm doing the podcast. Okay. But I got to go back to something we kind of touched on earlier. I got to get to here. I read this book while I was having cancer. My wife and I were divorced, and I had just come home from surgery. And my good friend James Porter had sent me this book before surgery. So I picked this book up and I read it before surgery. And I got to the second chapter and I went, oh, this is rabbinic trash. I got to get rid of this crap. And I threw the book across the room. Literally. I was like, oh, I can't do this. Because he was telling me in the book how we don't understand women. Well, I'm divorced. I'm pissed off, mad. I don't want to know anything more about women. I threw that book across the room. Anyway, after surgery, I came back and that book was sitting over there. I'm sitting here with these tubes hanging out of my head. I can't breathe. Life is ugly and I'm in pain. I'm on pain medication. And I saw that book and I went and picked it up. And this is the book, The Garden of Peace by Rabbi Shalom Arush. And I started reading chapter 3. And all of a sudden, the room filled up with the presence of God. And this whole conversation was about how we misunderstand our wives. And I'm sitting here reading this, and I went, oh my God. And I don't really know what happened, folks, other than I saw a whole different thing about how God sees women. And I started crying like a baby to where I had yuck coming out of my nose. I can't breathe because I've got staples from here to here and I can't breathe. I'm sitting here choking because I can't breathe. And I'm teared up as though my whole family was dead. That's how hard I'm crying. And guess who called? My wife, Michelle. We were divorced. She called in that very moment, okay? And I remember hearing when I saw it was her, I picked up the phone, cell phone. Now I can't talk. I'm a mess. But I heard in my spirit these words. Now you're ready to serve my heart. I'll never forget it. So we're having this kind of conversation. And all of a sudden we both started talking about the mistakes we made. And I never divorced my wife. So I was like, okay, well, let's try to do this over again. And I think that was in her heart too, because we ended up getting married remarried a few months later. And so God was in the restoration business. So my wife and I have been remarried since July of, okay, Michelle, I know you're listening. I can't remember. July 2012, I think it was. Anyway, the cancer was gone. I can't remember. So now we got to try to put our lives together. And the reason I'm doing this podcast, please hear me. We are broke. The divorce hurt us big time. I was running into all kinds of problems when I sold the company. It was nightmarish what we were going through. I'm up here with my one little dog for 2 years, sometimes living in my car. I had some good friends that put me up at a really nice place in Gig Harbor for 14 months. Teresa and David Strellinger, I'll never forget them for that. Anyway, Michelle and I decided we're going to put this thing back together. And I felt like the God was restoring us. So we got remarried. But I have a passion in my life now as a result of all of this. We got married with nothing. We had nothing. The properties were gone. Everything's gone. We don't have nothing. And so we're trying to do all this. Meanwhile, I'm doing podcasts and speaking and I'm bouncing off the walls with all this stuff in my head about the kingdom of God. And my wife, she kind of joins me with this and jumps in. She's kind of in her little place, but she sees the transformation in my life, and she's like my wingman, so to speak. Anyway, we've been broke for a long time, and I met this guy recently. Uh, I had to make a decision about the house we're in last year, and I didn't want to make it. Anyway, sis, this is when you came out here, and we had a beautiful time. I'm struggling with a few things. Oh, by the way, my sister took me to Greece and Turkey. That's the one. That's the culprit right there who did that. Do you remember how that happened? Tell that story. This.
Well, I had been gifted a trip to Israel in 2015, and from that point on, all I ever wanted to do was to be able to pay it forward. And this trip for Greece and Turkey came up through Mark Biltz and his crew. And so our youngest brother, David, he was on my heart to gift him. And I don't quite remember the conversation, but I do remember you wanting to jump on board and go. And then it was in my heart to make sure you became a part of that. And so it was, okay, you're all set, Jeff. I'll take care of the rest of it. Because the Father had blessed me. I had retired early. I had a little bit of change. And it was an amazing journey with me and my two brothers. But that's how that came about, because you were interested in going. I was like, okay, yep, okay, he's going. I'm going to make sure he goes. So off we went.
Well, that was a big blessing. I had a huge epiphany while I was over there, but that's another show. I don't have a whole lot of time here, so I got to kind of move this thing forward. But to say this. Go ahead, sis.
So,
yeah.
One of the biggest pieces, I was having a conversation with someone recently, and they were talking about, following the 10 commandments and this and that. And, I was said, well, there's 613. And they was like, what? But to shorten the story, the bottom line was most of those commandments, a lot of them deal with how we interact with each other.
Right.
And that is the passion you have with people. It's amazing to me sometimes. You just start talking to people in a grocery store, like the fireman. You just love people, and you love interacting with them, and that whole thing just really blossomed in you. And that's really the heart of the Father. How we treat one another is way deeper than anything else in all that you've learned. We can learn from his word. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, true to what you just said, I begin to see how God sees us, and we're like the pinnacle of his achievement. We are like the crown jewel of everything that he's done. And I began to see how amazing. I mean, I've always been a people person, but I started seeing how amazing we are. And, I have an appreciation for the way God designed us and made us and all those things and all of our foibles and failures and mistakes. He has kept us on this planet for centuries. So my love for people just exploded. And when I got done doing the show with Dina Dye, who's taught me, she filled in so many gaps to where it's a difficult conversation to have to people who don't or aren't on the other side of this.
Right.
However, I wanted to do a different podcast because I wanted it to be about people. I wanted this to be about people. So the idea of let's talk about it was born. And now I don't have, when we did what I had to refinance the house, it's not something that it's made it very difficult to get to the month-to-month thing. I have to pay for all of this. I haven't asked anybody for anything really. Carol, who engineers the show in the background, I try to send him something every month as a gift for helping me. He's not an employee, and that's not what this is all about. My passion is to just bring people on to the podcast to share what they are doing in the world that makes it a better place for the person next to them or the family member or the just individual people who make a difference by what they do, whether as a business, as a coach, as a friend, just a person. Because I think people in this world today, if we don't celebrate one another and if we don't literally embrace the people in the world with us when these storms come, and they are coming. I'm looking at California now, and when they come, we have to be willing to be one with the other. We have to do that. And so that's the heart of the program, is to just bring the average person on to share. I can't do this without funding. I just can't. So, I met a guy named Alan Collins recently, and he's made me think about money in a way that I never knew about money. I mean, I've had businesses, I've had restaurants, I've had the plumbing company. I've always been entrepreneurial, but I always was making money to pay my bills and to take care of my life. I was never using money for me. And I'm taking his course. I highly recommend it, folks. If you don't know anything about 401k, you don't know anything IRAs, you don't know how money works, there's a whole system out there yanking it out of your life. And once you learn how money can work for you, then you start learning how to stop those people from taking every dollar you have. And that's been a huge light bulb. And I've been asking the Father, show me a different way to do this. And he pops Alan Collins in my life. His business is called Financial Street Smarts. Guys, I implore you, if you don't know money, take his course. And he just started doing this. This is new for him. But I've learned so much. As a result, I pulled $14K out of my 401k, paid off $9,000 in debt. I've got a little bit left, not much, that I want to try to reinvest. I can't afford to dump all of that $14,000 into doing this. So I kind of need some help. And there's been some people who have helped me, but they raised the price. I have to pay this. I have to pay a monthly fee for that. There's just a lot of costs to do the internet stuff. So if you can help me out with that, that would be fantastic, just to get me through the next year. And the reason why I think that's important is because I think we are facing one hell of a year. And I think if we don't come together and lift one another up and support one another and help each other, and if you don't know about certain people out here who are doing those things, it's going to be a dark place. When you think about all those people in California right now, I really believe this, and I believe this from the bottom of my heart, from a God perspective. I think what the United States of America is about to go through needs the kind of leadership that we have now. And I just, it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. I'm looking at this from a God perspective, and I'm thinking we're about to go through something that the world has never seen, certainly not the United States of America. I'm not a prophet. I just sense it in my spirit. So for as long as you could do something to help people, if you don't do anything, then nothing's going to get done. And so that's why I do this podcast. I don't have a great big audience. I'm not looking for politicians to be on my show. I'm not looking for famous people. I'm looking for average people who have a story to tell. And I got to say about my sister, Desi, God bless you, sis. I watched you when you finally got what I was talking about. You're Zoom, and you understand, okay? But it's hard. It's hard to get the person who's been entrenched with a certain religious dogma to see this gigantic picture that we've never seen for 2,000 years.
Yes.
Listen, that's kind of the heart of the show, folks. I use Zelle. I'm going to give my sister the last word here in a minute. I use Zelle. If you want to make a contribution, I just want to pay for the year. I need a little freedom on this so I can do other things. But I use Zelle. I have Cash App. I have Venmo. I mean, I have all that stuff, but I need cash to help get this thing through the next year. And I have to do this. I have to redo this show, sign up for it all again by the 20th. And if I don't hit that mark, I can't do it. It's just that simple. So if you can help me, throw somebody my way, I'm going to put it to good use. Now, the final thing that I want to say about all of this is while you can breathe, be a light in somebody's life. We can't hate one another in this particular hour. I really, really believe that. We have to get rid of some of our divisions and just learn to embrace our neighbors and be the light in somebody's life. Tikkun olam, make the world a better place. No matter what the storm is, no matter what the situation is, be a light in the life of somebody who needs you. You never know what people are going through. Since we got just a few minutes left in the rest of the program, I'll give you the last word. I appreciate you for doing this. Thank you.
Welcome. So you mentioned this gentleman and his class. Is it possible to put his information out there so people can sign up for his class? Because right now there's nothing on there except your information. So I don't know if that's something you could do for him or for us to be able to tap into that resource. Just a suggestion. But
well, like I say,
as for what
thank you.
As for what I would like to end with is one of the most common things I come across when talking to people about the biblical story from a kingdom governmental structure. It really is daunting. Somehow we don't want to see the kingdom through the lens of a government. And yet the Father paints a clear picture. He talks about a temple where everything governmental ran through that temple, everything political ran through the provinces, all of what he describes in the is the foundation for everything else. It is the foundation for you to understand who he is and how he intended us to navigate the world and his kingdom all at once. And if you give yourself a chance to understand it from that perspective, you'll see the Father in a way that your life will just never, ever, ever be the same.
No, that's a good way to end it, sis. Remember, financialstreetsmarts.com, financialstreetsmarts.com. You can always contact me. My phone number has been moving across the screen for as long as we've been sitting here. Alan is becoming a good friend. He's an honest man. He's a man too. That's a nice thing. He's a manly man. You got it. If you lived in Washington State, you know what I was talking about. But the bottom line is, I don't have the kind of money. The job that I took was a cut and pay. I can't crawl around in the dirt anymore. I'm 65 years old. So my company said, would you do this? It's less money. I'm not making the kind of money I would if I was in a truck plumbing. And my house costs went up. So we're just barely getting there, but I'm learning how to do things differently. So join me on the podcast. Let's talk about it. Financially, I could use a lot of help. And if you want to be a guest and you got a story to tell, talk to me, because that's what this show's all about. That's kind of it, sis. Thank you so much. I'm glad you got through. What did you have to do to get through? What happened?
We'll talk about that off screen. It was a lot.
All right. I want to thank everybody who tuned in. God bless you all. And we will talk to you next week. I hope that we have a guest. And if you want to be a guest, please reach out and call me or get in touch with me on Facebook. This is Jeff. Let's talk about it. Thank you, Desi. I love you. God
Love you
bless
too.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.